All at the age of 63, Nell Newman, the progeny of the renowned Paul Newman, finally broke her reticence, sharing her experiences for the initial time in a startling discourse with CBS Sunday Morning. The confessions she divulged shook and even dismantled one of the most captivating personas that Hollywood had meticulously maintained for many years. For concealed behind those captivating azure orbs that had once become an enduring emblem of the silver screen, there was not the depiction of a devoted parent or an impeccable spouse as viewers had perpetually envisioned, but rather the representation of a man leading one radiant life showcased for public observation, and another concealed existence reserved exclusively for the individual he truly cherished. The most poignant aspect of it all resided in his final testament, a stark document that eradicated every vestige of his family's lineage, bequeathing his considerable wealth to an enigmatic individual identified solely by two. And what was it that impelled a figure so universally acclaimed as a legend to forsake his wife and offspring? All to safeguard a clandestine affection, a connection never once acknowledged even in the final moments of his existence. All these truths will be brought to light in today's presentation. Westport, Connecticut, a tranquil community intended for. Yet behind the confines of the Newman estate, young Nell, a fair-haired lass who occupied her days sketching quietly beneath the canopy of an ancient oak, apprehended an early and harsh reality within that household. There were inquiries that, if articulated, would exact a toll on the affection of one's own. But then I comprehended that photographs remained silent, and so did my family. In Nell's recollection, she had never once witnessed her parents hold hands. Not seldom, but truly never. The embraces before the photographic lens endured only for a fleeting instant. Paul Newman, the man whose cerulean eyes had captivated women across the globe, was as unyielding as stone within the confines of his own domicile. Joanne Woodward, elegant, striking, and gentle, would retreat into herself. There was an occasion when I attempted to clasp my mother's hand as she was engaged in washing dishes and inquired, "Are you sorrowful?" She withdrew her hand as if she had inadvertently touched a flame. My mother was not vexed. She simply lacked the capacity to engage with anyone when sentiments were involved. Each morning, her father departed the residence at daybreak, never disclosing his destination to anyone. Upon his return, sometimes after a span of days, at other times after weeks, he would merely curve his lips into a faint acknowledgement before retreating to his study, closing the door behind him. From within, there were instances when a deep, resonant laughter emanated during extended telephone conversations. But never, not on a solitary occasion, was the voice on the other end her mother's. Nell vividly recalled a winter evening in 1972 when she heard the sharp splintering of a wine goblet in her mother's chamber. Rushing in, she discovered Joanne kneeling on the floor, clutching a fragment of broken glass in her hand, murmuring repeatedly, "You deceived me once more. You deceived me once more." As Nell trembled and inquired, "What has father committed?" Her mother merely regarded her and whispered through quivering lips, "Not every man harbors affection for women, my dear. But Hollywood would never embrace such a notion. At that precise moment, her young heart fractured into two. Not long thereafter, Nell chanced upon an aged Polaroid. In the image, Paul Newman was beaming, his arm encircling another gentleman, not in the manner of ordinary camaraderie. Paul's gaze directed at him conveyed the look of a man deeply enamored. When Nell presented the photograph to her mother, Joanne snatched it away, tore it to shreds, and incinerated it in the hearth, muttering under her breath, "We shall never inquire about her father's whereabouts, never question the reasons behind her mother's reliance on sleeping aids each night, never seek to comprehend why her parents occupied separate sleeping quarters on different floors, and above all, never ever broach the subject of love. We resided within walls adorned with accolades such as Oscars, yet not a single one spoke of contentment," she articulated with difficulty. Whenever visitors arrived, particularly individuals of distinction such as Gore Vidal, Robert Redford, or unfamiliar faces from New York, the atmosphere within the household underwent a complete transformation. Paul would attire himself impeccably, apply an unfamiliar cologne, and the evening would invariably conclude with the sound of his bedroom door being secured. No one dared to ascertain whom he had entertained. No one questioned why Joanne would depart earlier than usual, her countenance ashen, as if she had just been weeping. We possessed images that appeared flawless, yet our spirits were devoid of substance. Everything was a pretense, and the most disheartening realization was that I once believed I was mistaken for experiencing such sentiments. As she matured, Nell began to discern the indicators with greater clarity. One evening, she observed her father in the kitchen intently scrutinizing a crumpled missive before igniting it with a lighter engraved with the initials G.V. When she inquired to whom he had penned the note, Paul replied placidly, "Do not become an individual from whom I must I am merely apprehensive that I will never suffice in comparison to him." That singular declaration pierced through the carefully woven tapestry of veracity the family had meticulously concealed for decades, rending it asunder. And then, the initial individual who ventured to dismantle that shroud of secrecy was none other than her sibling, Scott Newman. He was the one who posed the most proscribed. Scott was unlike any other member of the family, Nell stated, her voice faltering during an interview with CBS in 2025. He was the first to vocalize the very sentiment that all of us were suppressing with our very lifeblood. Scott Newman, the eldest son, the one whom Hollywood had once characterized as Paul Newman's rebellious counterpart, ascended within a world of dazzling brilliance. But at a very early juncture, he comprehended that this luminescence was not at all glory. It was the stage illumination cast upon a tragedy poised to erupt. He was born under the weight of the expectations of an entire nation, bearing the Newman surname. It was anticipated that he would be refined, gifted, virile, and successful, mirroring his legendary father. Yet, even during his secondary school years, Scott began to question why he had never once observed his mother clasp his father's hand. Why, when his mother wept, did his father never approach her? And why, each time he uttered, "I love you," would his father merely offer a wry smile and turn away? The most agonizing query of all was this: Why did his father so frequent? I still recall the evenings when I could discern my mother's sobs emanating from her chamber, Nell reminisced. Scott would shatter his guitar until its neck snapped, while our father sat downstairs in solitude, pouring himself libations and fixated on the evening news. In 1974, a distressing incident transpired. At a modest gathering hosted by a classmate, an inebriated youth blurted out, "Hey, Scott, perhaps you should inquire of your father if he favors men or women before you endeavor to emulate his path." Scott erupted into a violent frenzy, assaulting the youth so severely that he required 6 sutures. Within a week, Scott was expelled. Paul Newman made no appearance at the school, nor did he confront his son. Instead, he dispatched legal counsel and a sum of money to discreetly resolve the matter. Not a solitary word of solace, not a single embrace. Scott returned home, hurled his adolescent awards. She would preserve it as a cherished memento for years to come. Within were pages inscribed in black ink, smudged by tears. If he does not genuinely cherish mother, then who am I? Am I merely a mishap or the consequence of a lifelong deception? Was I brought into existence through affect? But the genuine shock manifested in 1977 when Confidential Weekly published a monochromatic photograph captured at Malibu Beach in 1959. In the image, a man whose physique, visage, and demeanor bore an almost uncanny resemblance to Paul Newman was walking hand in hand with another gentleman. Both were attired in white shirts, tailored trousers, and were barefoot on the sand. There were no embraces, no overtly romantic gestures, but the manner in which they regarded each other with tenderness rendered it inconceivable to believe they were merely acquaintances. Hollywood was astounded. The press abstained from declaring. At that precise juncture, Scott was making arrangements to sign his inaugural action film contract. Abruptly, he was withdrawn from the project at the 11th hour. No one offered him a direct explanation, but he overheard a producer whisper behind his back, "Audiences will never regard you as a hero if your father is a man leading a clandestine existence." The blood volume was minimal, yet sufficient to elicit a scream of terror from his mother upon discovering him. Paul was absent. He was in New York, not in pursuit of euphoria, but to obliterate the indifference reflected in the eyes of the man whom the entirety of America venerated. Nell recollected, "I telephoned him once, and all I discerned was a heavy exhalation before the line went dead. The last occasion we conversed, he posed but one question: 'Do you believe Father ever truly loved anyone?' I was unable to bring myself to respond. A month thereafter, on the 20th day of November 1978, Los Angeles law enforcement officers breached the portal of the modest apartment Scott had been renting. They discovered him lying lifeless on the floor of the living area. Adjacent to him were a few scattered pills, half a bottle of red wine, and the television still illuminated, ironically broadcasting Paul Newman ascending a platform to receive an accolade for his portrayal in Slapshot. The investigative report stated, "No indications of foul play." cause of demise suspected suicide due to a pharmaceutical overdose. Nell was merely 18 years of age at that juncture, yet deep within, she knew with absolute certainty that Scott had not perished from narcotics. He had not succumbed to alcohol. He had perished from silence. He had perished because no one dared to articulate the query that had burdened him throughout his existence. Did our father ever And then, from the remnants of that anguish, Nell gradually came to the realization that her family, alongside her father's legacy, had been meticulously constructed layer upon layer, with secrets never intended for revelation. One frigid evening in 1981, snow and wind swept across the grounds, blanketing the rear expanse of the Newman estate in Westport. In that bone-chilling cold, Nell Newman, having just attained the age of 22, quietly navigated the corridor, intending to proceed to the kitchen for an additional blanket. But abruptly, she halted before her father's study. A warm golden luminescence emanated from the aperture of the partially ajar door, yet what arrested her was not the light itself, but a profound exhalation. It was not the sharp inhalation of an actor rehearsing lines, nor the weary sound of someone concluding a lengthy telephone conversation. It was a deep, suppressed sigh, one that seemed to carry the immense burden of a secret striving to escape from within a chest. Nell remained immobile. Then, with utmost care, she crept nearer and peered through the narrow opening. Paul Newman was seated in solitude. On the desk lay neither a cinematic script nor a report authored by Newman himself. It was a handwritten missive, an extensive 3-page letter penned in the identical script that Nell had only ever observed him employ on holiday cards for her mother. But on this occasion, the recipient was not Joanne. In that instant, it felt as though all the unspoken questions of her childhood had been unequivocally answered in the faltering strokes of her father's pen. In the letter, Paul spoke of nothing pertaining to cinematic renown or accolades he had once earned. Instead, he chronicled the expression in Robert Redford's eyes when they stood together in the desolate Utah landscape, filming the concluding sequence of. He spoke of the occasions when Redford's hand would brush against his shoulder when no other observer was present, and of the nights they spent imbibing whiskey atop hotel rooftops without uttering a single word, silent like two men, terrified that if they spoke, the truth would become irrefutable. There was one night when you regarded me, simply regarded me, and I felt as though the entire world had absolved me. Red, you conveyed no. But if, one day, you were to enter this chamber and look upon me as you once did, I would relinquish all, the fame, the family, the entirety of Hollywood. Nell's respiration accelerated. Her hands trembled with such vehemence that she nearly dropped the page. Just then, the telephone rang in the adjacent room. Paul arose and departed from the desk. Nell swiftly replaced the letter, withdrawing as if. But one verity became indelibly imprinted upon her consciousness, never to be effaced. Her father had not been corresponding with a confidant. He had been writing to the individual who stirred his innermost affections. A few weeks hence, reality appeared to ascend to the surface. Joanne Woodward, who was in California at the time, engaged in a photographic session for the cover of Vogue, abruptly rescinded her commitments and expedited her journey on the earliest available flight back to Westport. The impetus, an anonymous telephone communication originating from an unlisted number conveying but a single chilling pronouncement. If you still hold your marriage in regard, proceed to the Mayflower Hotel. That very evening, Paul asserted he was in New York to confer with a colleague concerning a novel screenplay. That colleague was none other than Robert Redford, the individual whom the press persistently characterized as his spiritual counterpart. No one can ascertain with absolute certainty what transpired within room 708. But upon Joanne's return to Westport, she uttered not a solitary word. Her visage was pallid. Her arm bore a dark contusion, as though it had been grasped with excessive force, and her ostensibly composed eyes, even beneath a substantial application of cosmetics, could not conceal the traces of tears that had been shed. That night, for the initial time in decades, the mansion, typically as silent as a sepulcher, reverberated with the sound of objects being shattered from the bedroom. No vociferations, no disputes, only the sharp, frigid fracture of an Italian porcelain lamp as it impacted the floor. From that moment onward, Paul Newman began to undergo a transformation. He resumed smoking, the very habit Joanne had compelled him to abandon back in the 1960s. He ceased to sleep soundly, frequently found seated in isolation on the veranda well past midnight, gazing wordlessly into the darkness. On certain nights, Nell would observe him standing rigidly before a mirror, gripping a fountain pen with such intensity that it appeared he might snap it in two. On one occasion, merely because Nell inadvertently dropped a Beatles record in the dining room, he shattered the baccarat crystal vase situated at the center of the table, a wedding gift bestowed upon Joanne, and departed with. He did not engage in profanity, yet the silence he left in his wake bore a weight far exceeding any physical blow. Joanne, meanwhile, receded into herself, moving through the residence like a phantom. From that night forward, she never again addressed Paul as honey or my love under any circumstances. When a journalist at that period, Nell was still pursuing her studies in ecology, but she gradually came to comprehend that her parents' union was not one of affection. It was a 50-year theatrical production wherein two accomplished performers adhered to their assigned roles to prevent the backdrop from disintegrating. However, a solitary missive, an anonymous telephone call, and a singular hotel chamber had starkly exposed the fissures that had perpetually existed. From that point onward, Nell became more observant. In an aged drawer within her father's study, she unearthed lists of telephone numbers designated solely with an R or a T, unaccompanied by surnames. Some were crossed out, while others bore notations such as call back after 10 p.m., do not inform Joanne. She also discovered faded vintage photographs folded into quarters and concealed behind family portraits, the visages of strangers, their gazes lingering far too long, far too tenderly upon her father. And just when Nell believed that every revelation had finally become comprehensible, she abruptly apprehended something further. Robert Redford might have been the most significant individual, but he was not necessarily the sole person. In 1981, in the foyer of the Carlisle Hotel, the customary rendezvous point for New York's elite, a clandestine occurrence was subtly unfolding within the plush, carpeted corridors, a secret that no one could have ever envisioned witnessing in such a setting. That evening, Nell had only intended to stop by the Carlisle to deliver a sheaf of documents to her mother. She had just concluded an internship interview at a local television station, her spirit still buoyant with anticipation. But as the elevator doors parted, her world froze in a peculiar tableau reminiscent of an overlooked scene from the family narrative she had once naively deemed impeccable. Her father, Paul Newman, emerged from the left corridor. Accompanying him was not Joanne. It was Gore Vidal, the distinguished author, celebrated screenwriter, sharp-witted political activist, and an individual who had maintained a close association with the Newman family for over 2 decades. Yet, on that particular evening, he did not walk with the demeanor of a comrade. He proceeded alongside Paul as a paramour. Gore's hand brushed against Paul's wrist, lingered for a moment in a tender caress, then withdrew. Both were clad in long coats, walking so closely together that it seemed a single gust of wind might have sufficed to press their cheeks against one another. And then Paul noticed his daughter. That expression, Nell recalled in an interview with Esquire magazine in 2018, will remain with me for the remainder of my existence. It was not the look of a father caught in the act. It was the look, "Please, do not!" Gore offered her a smile as if nothing untoward had transpired. Paul proceeded directly into the elevator. The doors closed and she remained there, frozen in place, ensnared by the secret that had just been unveiled. From that night onward, Gore Vidal did not vanish. He appeared with increased frequency. Joanne remained reticent, but Nell began to discern the indications. Telephone calls at 2 in the morning, business excursions spanning several days with no communication to the family, and handwritten notations placed beside the home telephone bearing only a brief directive. G called back once. She witnessed her father retrieve from his shirt pocket, and in it, he and Gore were depicted seated by a lakeside, leaning back against each other, their gazes fixed upon the distant horizon, as if the two of them had journeyed far beyond the boundaries of friendship, yet had never found their way back. Nell once posed a direct question to her mother. "Do you believe, Dad, that this is the man you always envisioned him to be?" Joanne Woodward, the distinguished Academy Award-winning actress who had previously portrayed a woman grappling with a fractured identity, paused, her breath catching, before responding with measured deliberation. There are facets of human experience that remain beyond our capacity to articulate, yet they persist, influencing our lives daily, even when we try to dismiss them. For Nell, this pregnant pause from her mother was an unspoken admission, a truth that needed no further elucidation. Meanwhile, Gore Vidal maintained his characteristic public reserve, never overtly confessing anything. However, in 1995, within the pages of his memoir, Palimpsest, he penned a single sentence that sent profound reverberations through the American literary landscape. He wrote, "There are men who will never belong to us, but every time they smile, we feel alive." Though he never explicitly named Paul Newman, the implication was clear. Journalists understood that Vidal, only one individual held that singular distinction, a man who himself had remained reticent about revealing his deepest sentiments. Even in a late-life interview with Vanity Fair in 2006, when queried about whether Paul Newman represented the paramount love of his existence, Vidal offered only a non-committal shrug, a sip of his drink, and a direct, unblinking gaze into the camera. "We shared nights that neither of us, that is all I can say." The studio fell into a hushed silence. No one dared to probe further. Yet Nell, without the need for further inquiry, grasped the profound significance of those words. In 2003, as Joanne began to exhibit the initial indicators of cognitive decline, her memory faltering to the point of forgetting her daughter's birthday, or even the faces of familiar acquaintances, in a moment of semi-consciousness, suspended between waking and dreaming, a state of surreal clarity, she grasped Nell's hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Do you recall the way your father looked at Gore? It was a look he never once bestowed upon me." And though I may forget all else, even my own sense of self, that particular gaze will forever be etched in my mind. Joanne Woodward had long been esteemed as Hollywood's paragon of intellect and grace, a steadfast beacon of fidelity in a milieu often characterized by artifice and deception. Her celebrated performance in The Three Faces of Eve had earned her the prestigious Academy Award, and she was famously the only woman Paul Newman, their image gracing the cover of Life magazine, had captured the public's imagination as the quintessential American lovers, radiant, romantic, and seemingly unblemished in their perfection. Yet, by that time, all such splendor and acclaim had receded into the realm of memory. As Joanne resided in a modest room at a nursing facility in Westport, Connecticut, the gentle sunlight filtering through the aged window panes offered little warmth to her frail, lined hands, hands that had once held Paul Newman's heart for over 50 years. Alzheimer's disease had infiltrated her mind like a phantom intruder, systematically pilfering her recollections, from significant dates like Nell's birthday to moments she had once considered indelible, her inaugural acting role, her treasured awards, and the nights spent beneath the dazzling glow of Broadway marquees. Joanne studied it intently for an extended period before softly inquiring, "Who is this individual? Do I know them?" Nevertheless, amidst the disarray that threatened to obliterate an entire lifetime, one name persistently surfaced, hauntingly lodged within the depths of her subconscious. It was not Paul Newman, nor her children. It was Robert. Initially, Nell dismissed it as a mere linguistic slip, a consequence of her aging mother's fragmented mind. However, The nursing staff soon began to regard Nell with a disquieting concern, recounting instances where Joanne would awaken abruptly in the dead of night, her eyes vacant. Yet her voice, disturbingly lucid, would articulate what sounded like a long-suppressed secret, a confession previously held captive. She spoke of an unfamiliar fragrance lingering on her husband's attire, of unanswered telephone calls from the Essex House Hotel in New York, of a solitary strand of golden hair discovered on a white pillow, details seemingly unrelated to her own existence. Finally, she uttered a name, enunciated with a heavy sorrow that imbued each syllable with profound grief. Robert. It was a name Nell had encountered only once before in her life, nearly 4 decades prior, when, having skipped school to visit New York, she had inadvertently witnessed her father emerging from an elevator at the Essex House Hotel, accompanied by the man widely regarded as his closest confidant, Robert. At the time, Nell was a mere 17 years old. She had remained frozen, concealed behind a marble pillar, observing her father, impeccably attired in his customary gray suit, as he gently rested his hand on Robert's shoulder and uttered something that elicited a shared, uninhibited laugh from both of them, a moment of effortless intimacy and natural camaraderie, as if the world held no secrets they needed to conceal. She had chosen to remain silent. She rationalized it as the overactive imagination of a teenager, convincing herself she might have misperceived the scene, that it was hardly significant enough to disrupt the delicate equilibrium of a family bound by reputation and societal expectations. But now, hearing her mother's voice, albeit fragmented and faint, referencing the same hotel, the same elusive scent, and the same penetrating gaze that had never been directed at her, Nell's entire world imploded, collapsing like a sand castle, succumbing to a tempest. "That was the day he betrayed me," Joanne whispered, her gaze fixed on a photograph taken at Rhode Island Beach, a sun-drenched summer, captured in 1985, when the entire He told me he was meeting a director to discuss a new project, but I always knew, because that look, it was never intended for me. She then lowered her head, her voice a mere whisper, as if her very breath were about to dissipate, yet she repeated each broken word with unwavering clarity. "Essex House, room 1217. I called all night, but no one ever answered. What might have seemed like disjointed utterances coalesced with chilling precision into the buried memory Nell had long suppressed. She sat in profound silence, a crushing weight pressing down on her chest. Her mother, the woman who had seemingly pardoned every transgression of her husband, who had steadfastly defended their family's honor for half a century, still retained a sharp, precise recollection of a hotel room number that the world intended her to forget. Even as her cognitive faculties deteriorated due to illness, her heart steadfastly held on to the searing pain of betrayal. Joanne never raised her voice, nor did yet her eyes, whenever they drifted towards the fading light outside the window, conveyed an unspoken indictment, a profound rupture that time itself could never mend. At one point, Nell ventured to ask, "Do you still recall how Dad adored you?" Joanne turned her head, her clouded eyes settling with a steady gaze, and replied softly, her voice as ethereal as mist, "There was a time I believed it." Everything that had once been lauded as the pinnacle of love, the model of a devoted Hollywood marriage, had dissolved into mere ephemeral bubbles, bursting under the harsh scrutiny of truth. Just as the family began to brace themselves for a somber yet tranquil farewell, anticipating Paul's presence by Joanne's side until her final moment. Behind the familiar visage of Paul Newman, the man who had consistently captivated audiences with his gentle smile, his benevolent gaze, and his boundless philanthropy, lay a decision of such cold, calculated ruthlessness that it brought his own family to their knees. What amplified the shock was the fact that this was not an accidental oversight, but a deliberate, meticulously planned action initiated long before. The deeper Nell delved into the clauses of the will, the more difficulty she had in breathing. The entirety of Newman's own, the colossal salad dressing enterprise valued at $100 million, was not distributed equitably as Paul had previously assured. Nothing was allocated to Joanne, his wife, who by then was progressively forgetting her own name. No provisions were made for his children, who had endured his struggles and sacrifices in cultivating the. Instead, the entire estate was bequeathed to a single individual, Robert Forrester, a name that had, for years, remained a discreet presence, like a faint shadow in the background. And then, as the lawyer solemnly read aloud, Paul had stipulated a no-contest clause. Anyone who challenged the will would forfeit even their modest cash inheritance. Nell felt as though an ice-cold torrent had surged through her chest. Stunned, she turned to her sister, Clea, and whispered, "We haven't just lost our father. We've lost the opportunity to ever truly comprehend who he was." Adding to the profound distress, a confidential addendum to the will leaked by a former associate at the law firm revealed that Paul Newman had once contemplated establishing a private entity named the Quiet Legacy. The most astonishing detail within this provision was that the primary beneficiary was not his wife nor his children, but an enigmatic individual identified solely by the initials RR. Concurrently, both Vanity Fair and the New York Post published sensational articles speculating that RR might indeed stand for Robert Redford. The public was utterly shaken. Long-dormant rumors concerning a clandestine relationship between the two legendary figures, once weakly refuted, resurfaced with a haunting and unsettling intensity. The speculation intensified when a journalist from The Advocate claimed that Paul and Redford had embarked on a discreet excursion to Tuscany. However, upon contacting Dorothy Hughes, a close friend of her mother and Joanne's personal assistant throughout the 1980s, the response left her deeply unsettled. Regarding the Italian excursion, Joanne was aware, but she had opted for silence. She harbored the hope that if Paul experienced personal freedom, he might eventually return to her, perhaps not entirely whole, but still her. In the end, all that remained was a formidable bastion of power, transferred into the custody of another man to be guarded by legal stipulations as sharp as blades, severing the final vestiges of his connection to his family. There was no handwritten correspondence, not a single word of explanation, only the stark signatures affixed to the will and a solitary declaration made by Robert Forrester when questioned about Paul's decision to exclude his family from the management of his legacy. Forrester stated, "He trusted me, and I believe that is the only thing that truly matters." That statement landed like the definitive slam of a door, an invisible verdict delivered, leaving Nell's mind awash with countless unanswered questions. The father who had once sworn his life to his family had now rendered them strangers. On September 26, 2008, Paul Newman, the celebrated Hollywood icon with the eternally captivating blue eyes, drew his last breath at his farm in Westport, Connecticut. A profound hush fell over the United States. CBS replayed iconic scenes from The Hustler and Cool Hand Luke. CNN broadcast the prevailing belief was that behind the dazzling fame lay an idyllic family unit, a devoted wife and children who proudly bore the Newman name. However, this was merely a partial truth. Just 3 days following his passing, Nell Newman, his eldest daughter, received a formal notification from her father's private legal office. "We have officially commenced the probate of the will as per his instructions. Only a few minor details remain to be addressed." In that precise moment, Nell was struck by a painful certainty that something was gravely amiss, and she was, indeed, correct. The final testament, hastily executed a mere 6 weeks prior to Paul Newman's death, completely omitted the names of his wife and his 6 children. The entirety of the estate, valued at over $600 million, encompassing shares in Newman's own real estate holdings, image rights, and royalties, was irrevocably transferred to a legal entity known as the Newman's Own Foundation. Presiding over this foundation was none other than Robert Forrester, the former CEO of the philanthropic enterprise and the man Paul had placed his absolute confidence in during his final years. The family reacted with immediate, yet what rendered the situation even more unsettling was the striking silence from the media. Not a single major news outlet dared to investigate further. No one questioned the exclusion of Joanne Woodward, the wife, who had stood by his side for 50 years and was then grappling with dementia from any inheritance whatsoever. Nell, who had previously, in a rare interview with the New York Times in 2015, she spoke through a torrent of unrestrained tears. "I never sought financial gain, but the manner in which they transformed my father into a mere instrument and relegated my mother to the periphery, as if she had never been an integral part of his life, was unbearable." Following this, independent legal professionals, journalists, and even former colleagues of Paul Newman arrived at a unified and disturbing conclusion. Paul might not have been of sound mind when he executed his final will. According to leaked medical records from an inpatient facility in New York as early as mid-2007, Newman was exhibiting symptoms of cognitive deterioration, confusion, disorientation. In May of 2008, merely 3 months before signing the will, he was reportedly diagnosed with temporary legal incapacitation. Nevertheless, these records were never officially recognized. An anonymous source who had previously been associated with Paul's legal team divulged to Vanity Fair. "I witnessed a handwritten letter Paul penned to Joanne in June. Its contents stood in stark contradiction to the will." He offered an apology, expressed his concern about not having sufficient time to revise it, and implored her forgiveness should any complications arise after his departure. However, this letter was never incorporated into the official legal documentation. The sole individual in an investigative series published in 2019, they posed the direct question: who was truly behind Paul Newman's final will? The Guardian took it a step further, labeling it the most significant misappropriation of a legacy in Hollywood history. As for Robert Forrester, the individual now at the helm of Newman's own foundation, he significantly reduced funding for projects championed by the Newman family, discontinued support for several organizations that Paul had steadfastly championed for over 2 decades, and most shockingly, barred all family members from participating in the foundation's board. In 2020, Nell brought the matter before the Connecticut State Court, petitioning for the reopening of the will. The court denied the petition, stating, "There is insufficient evidence to demonstrate that Paul Newman was not of sound mind at the time of signing the will." However, in late 2021, an unexpected development emerged. A former assistant to Joanne discovered a handwritten letter concealed within a copy of The Prophetee by Khalil Gibran, a cherished book shared by both husband and wife. Tucked away, the handwriting was unmistakably Paul's, and the fingerprints were intact. Its message was brief, yet profoundly devastating. "My dearest Joanne, if I am no longer lucid enough to convey this directly, then read these words. Everything belongs to you, from my name to my career, to the very reason I have continued to exist these many years. If anything goes awry, know that it was not my choice. I love you, and Paul." While this letter held no legal standing, it served as the final fragment that irrevocably shattered the complete picture. In 2023, when an ABC reporter inquired if Nell still intended to pursue the reopening of the will, and perhaps he is awaiting our discovery of it. Perhaps what Paul Newman had labored to suppress deep within himself for his entire life was not the multi-million-dollar investments, nor the renowned salad dressing recipe, nor the dazzling reputation that commanded universal reverence in Hollywood. What he guarded most vigilantly, concealed beneath the placid smile and those iconic, a man who, though bathed in the brilliance of the spotlight, ultimately closed his eyes in the shadows of secrets he dared not name. And as the final curtain descended, as whispers escalated into accusations, as documents were re-examined and inheritances were rescinded, the sole sentiment remaining in Nell's heart was not anger, nor defiance, nor a lawsuit that had never been victorious, but a profound silent love and unwavering loyalty, a bond of affection that no legal document could ever sever. Nell had once been heralded as Paul Newman's spiritual successor, had once poured her heart into his product packaging, and had once envisioned carrying on her father's legacy with immense pride. But then all of it was obliterated as if it had never existed. The only indelible mark was the bloodline, an invisible thread, yet one that bled a little more with each passing. "I never stopped loving my father," Nell confessed, her voice fracturing like an unhealable wound during her final interview on CBS Sunday Morning in 2010. "Regardless of his actions, regardless of how I was excluded from every decision, I still loved him the way a daughter loves her father." Yet, love does not invariably walk hand in hand with forgiveness, and I want to believe that is true, but I simply wish he had possessed the courage to live authentically, not in the eyes of the world, but with his own family. Her eyes, devoid of any trace of fury, held only the heavy burden of regret, the suffocating ache of a child standing before a door eternally locked. She never explicitly defined what constituted living authentically, but the audience understood. Everyone understood. Within the sealed archives, the unsent love letters, the clandestine rendezvous with men once known as co-stars, and the hushed whispers from behind the scenes, a man named Scott, another named Redford, another named Dean, all fragments of an incomplete puzzle, secrets he carried with him to the grave. Yet, those left behind are condemned to bear the weight of that very silence for a lifetime. It was not mere. When the image of a father becomes an icon, his children are left perpetually grappling with unanswered questions. And in the end, as the narrative concludes and the screen fades to black, a single, quiet question resonates in the minds of every viewer. Are we truly living as ourselves before it is too late? There are nights when Nell finds herself seated alone on the porch of their ancestral home in Westport, observing the moonlight casting its ethereal glow across the garden her father once meticulously tended. A gentle breeze rustles through the towering maple trees, carrying with it the faint murmur of words that were never uttered. In that profound stillness, she realizes that the deepest wound is not the lost fortune, nor the cold legal documents, nor the ceaseless barrage of rumors that refuse to subside. The true affliction is the void, an emptiness that nothing can fill, residing between a father and his daughter. An emptiness not born of physical absence, but of the towering walls of silence constructed from a lifetime of it endures, even amidst anger, even in the face of betrayal, and within the endless stream of questions that will never find resolution. Yet, it is silence itself that has transmuted that love into an obsession, akin to a river forced to flow in reverse, unable to find its natural course. At her core, a singular yearning persists. For Paul Newman to have once summoned the fortitude to sit with his children, meet their regardless of how harsh the reality may have been, at least it would have been genuine. Now, with only scattered remnants of fractured recollections, Nell comes to, and perhaps this profound void is precisely what constitutes his most authentic inheritance. An inheritance not defined by riches or renown, but by the lingering inquiries that reverberate across each passing age. Do we possess the nerve to confront our own authenticity? Or will we opt for silence until our final breath? Beneath the resplendent luminescence of fame lie missives that remained unsent, offspring overlooked in obscurity, and a verity that may have been interred with Paul Newman, forever lost to discovery. Have you ever contemplated the implications if such a celebrated figure, a man lauded throughout his existence for his uprightness, harbored a secret so monumental that even his immediate family remained unaware? We genuinely seek your viewpoint, so please share your reflections in the comments section. And should you feel this narrative warrants wider dissemination, kindly remember to click subscribe, activate the notification alert, and spread the word to enable others to uncover this remarkable tale. Farewell for the present, and we anticipate our next encounter in upcoming presentations.